The chisel slips in your grip, nearly tumbling into the dark. You catch it before it hits the stone floor. One sound too many down here, and you are finished. The torch sputters in your other hand, the flame stretching shadows across walls painted with gods who watch you as if they know your crime. The heat has no escape. It presses in from all sides, clinging to your skin like a fever. Each breath is heavy with dust and the faint sweetness of old resin. Your knees grind into the grit of the passage floor, every shift of weight sending tiny avalanches of sand down your spine. The ceiling is so low you feel it in the hunch of your shoulders. You can hear it too, the subtle hiss of stone settling. Somewhere far above, the desert lies in moonlit silence. Down here, the air feels thick enough to hold your footsteps in place. Your partner waits behind you, crouched so close you can hear his breath scrape in his throat. 2 men in this shaft means twice the noise, twice the danger. The torchlight turns the painted figures on the wall into something almost alive. One god's outstretched hand seems to follow you. Another's eyes catch the light in a way that makes you turn your head. A patch of wall gives a hollow note under your chisel. You stop. Your partner leans forward, the faint shuffle of his knees on stone, the loudest sound you have heard in minutes. This is it, the chamber's skin. You picture what lies beyond. Necklaces heavy with gold, boxes carved with sacred images, wrappings studded with amulets, each one a fortune in itself. You also picture the Medjay guard who would happily mount your head on a pike for the crime. The copper edge of your chisel bites again. Your palm aches from gripping it too hard. Shadows jump and stretch as the torch dips lower in its bracket. Sweat rolls down your temple and disappears into your collar. Another strike. The sound is different now. Hollow, empty. You and your partner exchange a glance, a silent agreement. The treasure is within reach. You raise the chisel for the final blow. The sound that follows is not stone breaking. It is footsteps, close, getting closer. Tomb robbers in ancient Egypt were rarely nameless drifters. More often, they were the very men who had built or guarded the tombs themselves. Quarrymen who had shaped the corridors, guards who knew which patrols fell asleep at their post, embalmers who had helped wrap the dead in gold-threaded linens. Without such inside knowledge, a thief could wander for weeks in the desert and never find the hidden mouth of a royal burial. The historical records we have are blunt. The Abbott Papyrus, a 3,000-year-old report from the reign of Ramses IX, reads like a police case file. It names thieves from Deir el-Medina, the royal workman's village, and details exactly how they cut into the tomb of King Sobekemsaf II. They broke through the limestone, tore the wrappings from his body, and stripped the gold from his fingers, amulets, and mask. Then they sealed the wall to hide their entry. The robbers were not reckless. They studied the tombs they targeted, sometimes waiting years for the perfect chance. The tomb of Ramses VI, buried deep in the Valley of the Kings, was designed to deter thieves with steep corridors and thick blocking stones. Yet it was still breached, its riches scattered into the black market trade within a generation of sealing. These jobs required discipline. The crews were organized, each man with a role: the diggers who breached the stone, the lookouts posted above ground, the carriers who hauled the loot out under cover of night, and the merchants who laundered it through distant markets. This was not random crime. It was a profession with its own hierarchy and rules. But the risks were constant. A whispered rumor could bring guards before you even touched the treasure. Betrayal often came from within a friend, hoping to save himself by offering your name to the authorities. The law moved swiftly when royal dead were disturbed, and punishment was designed to erase you from history: execution, dismemberment, or burning, to deny you the afterlife. Greed was not the only reason men turned to this life. In years of famine, a single amulet could feed a family for months. The priests warned that defiling a tomb meant eternal damnation. The guards promised you would not live to regret it. Still, there were always men ready to try. For every tomb sealed in the valley, there was someone who knew its secrets, and someone willing to risk everything to claim them. The Valley of the Kings looks empty under the moon. To an outsider, It is nothing but stone and silence. But to someone who once worked here, every ridge, every slope, every shadow is a map. The men who built the tombs often became the men who robbed them, and their knowledge was the key. They knew which cliffside led to the hidden entrance of KV-55, the mysterious tomb thought to hold the remains of Akhenaten or one of his kin. They knew where the blocking stones were thin and which passages could be bypassed entirely. Inside jobs were the most successful because they removed the greatest uncertainty: where to dig. Tombs like the one built for Ramses III were designed with false corridors, hidden niches, and choke points that could trap a thief. But the men who cut those corridors could retrace them in darkness, counting steps and turns by memory. They could dig through a soft seam of limestone rather than fight through the massive sealed door. The process began above ground. The robbers chose a night when the wind would carry sound away from the valley. They waited until the guards were at their weakest near dawn or during a festival, when their attention wandered toward the city. A rope was lowered into the chosen spot, tools bundled tightly to keep them from clanging. The entry point was never obvious. It might be a shallow depression in the cliffside, invisible, until you knew to look for the way moonlight hit it. Once inside, the thieves moved like the crews that had carved these chambers years earlier, slow, precise, and utterly silent. Every strike of the chisel was timed to the faint gusts of wind or the distant echo of drums from the city, masking the sound. This work was not without danger. Even men who had worked on these tombs could misjudge a beam or cut into the wrong wall, collapsing part of the structure. In some cases, like the looting of Sobekemsaf II's tomb, the robbers were almost trapped when a section of ceiling cracked under their weight. They made it out, but their marks on the stone betrayed them later. For a successful inside job, the chamber was never entered through the official doorway. That way, the seals remained intact, and the priests believed the tomb was untouched. Loot could be removed through the thieves' tunnel, night after night, until the job was done. Then the entry was sealed, leaving no sign except the absence of what had once been inside. And sometimes, that absence was not discovered until years later, when the tomb was opened for ritual or restoration. By then, the robbers were long gone or lying in an unmarked grave for a different job gone wrong. The tools of an ancient Egyptian tomb robber were not exotic relics of fantasy, but the same implements used to build the tombs in the first place. Archaeologists have found copper chisels, wooden mallets, and stone hammers discarded near breached chambers, their edges dulled from hours of use. Bronze tools were prized, as they bit into limestone better than copper, but even they wore down quickly against the tomb's harder stones. Rope was essential. Coils of palm fiber or twisted flax were strong enough to lower a man and his tools into a shaft, yet light enough to carry without leaving obvious tracks. These ropes, found in ancient workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina, often bear the same knots that would have been used in both construction and theft. A good knot could mean the difference between escape and falling to your death in the dark. Lighting was another concern. The tombs were pitch black, and without oil lamps or rush torches, a robber would be blind. Lamps found in the Valley of the Kings often contained soot patterns that suggest they were held low to the ground, both to conserve oil and to keep smoke from filling the narrow corridors. Thieves sometimes wrapped the base in linen to keep the flame from flickering too much as they moved. Small wooden wedges and levers were used to pry up blocking stones without making the cracking sound of a sudden break. Sand could be poured into gaps to muffle the sound of shifting rock. Damp cloths were tied over the mouth to keep from coughing in the dust, a simple but necessary trick when the air had not moved for centuries. Water skins and dried rations were carried for long jobs, especially when the robbers tunneled in from a distant cliff face. In some breaches, like those near the tomb of Ramses VI, archaeologists have found evidence of campfires in hidden alcoves, places where thieves likely rested and planned their next move between shifts of digging. These were not the gadgets of modern adventure films. They were practical, familiar, and dangerous to carry if caught. Possession of chisels, lamps, and rope near the valley could be enough for an arrest as the tools themselves were proof of intent. Every item had to be chosen carefully. Too much gear meant slower movement and heavier loads. Too little meant risking a collapse or leaving empty-handed. A good robber knew how to carry just enough to get in, get the gold, and vanish into the desert before the first rays of dawn touched the cliffs. The wall ahead is more than stone. It is a warning carved in the language of the gods, a voice from 3,000 years ago still whispering in the dark. Hieroglyphs etched deep into the limestone promise, ruin to any who enter. The curses are vivid. Your neck will be wrung like a goose. Your body will be fed to crocodiles. Your soul will be stripped of its name and wander the underworld forever. To the priests, these threats were as real as the Sunday. They told stories of thieves who wasted away within days, their bodies broken by unseen hands. Tales spread of sudden plagues, strange accidents, or walls collapsing without cause. Fear was a weapon, and the words carved above the doorway were its sharpest edge. But some dangers were not superstition. The air inside a sealed chamber is stale, heavy and unmoving, thick with the resin used to wrap the dead. A deep breath can set your head spinning. The walls may hide hidden pits meant to swallow intruders whole. Ceiling beams, weakened over centuries, can drop with no warning at the touch of a chisel. It is here that history and cinema meet. In The Mummy, the curse takes the form of flesh-eating scarabs swarming from the shadows. Torches gutter, ancient spirits stir, and the air is alive with whispers. In reality, the danger is quieter and far more patient. It waits in the air you breathe, in the stone above your head, in the fact that no one will find you if the ceiling comes down. Even the most experienced robber feels it, that tightening in the chest, when the light of the torch brushes over a painted god's eyes and they seem to follow you. You tell yourself it is a trick of the shadows, but still you do not meet their gaze for long. Your partner stands back as you study the inscriptions. The gap in the wall is nearly ready, the stones soft and hollow beneath the chisel. You run your hand over the carved surface one last time, the grooves worn smooth by centuries. Somewhere beyond is treasure, beyond imagining. Somewhere beyond is the moment you either live to spend it or die with it in the dark. You raise the chisel. You strike. The sound is swallowed by the tomb. Stealing from a pharaoh was only the first step. Getting the loot out of the Valley of the Kings without being caught was the harder part. The process began inside the tomb. Each piece was handled like it could betray you, gold amulets wrapped in linen to silence their rattle, jars of perfumed oil sealed tight and disguised in plain clay vessels, carved treasures hidden under layers of coarse cloth. Nothing left the tomb in its original form if it could be altered. Gold masks and jewelry were often melted into rough ingots within days of being taken. Archaeologists have found fragments of exquisite craftsmanship reduced to lumps of metal, their artistry destroyed in favor of anonymity. The larger items, gilded furniture, ceremonial chests, were far more dangerous to move. These were sometimes dismantled into planks and fittings, each piece smuggled out on different nights to avoid suspicion. The robbers would bury their take under marked stones in the desert, returning over weeks or months to move it bit by bit. Trade networks carried the stolen goods far from Thebes. A necklace that once lay across a pharaoh's chest might reappear in a market in Memphis, or even further north, where no one recognized its royal origin. Oils and perfumes could be sold as temple donations, a quiet bribe that ensured the buyer would ask no questions. When the tomb of Sobekemsaf II was robbed, records show that the thieves removed precious metals and linens, selling them to traders who passed them off as goods from Nubia. By the time the authorities traced the items, they had changed hands so many times that reclaiming them was impossible. The smuggling routes were known to only a few. Merchants who dealt in stolen goods risked death if caught, but the profits outweighed the danger. A single gold amulet could buy loyalty for years. Some thieves kept one token for themselves: a ring, a bead, a fragment of painted wood hidden in a wall or buried under a floor, proof of where they had been. No hiding place was perfect. The desert kept its own records. Footprints left in sand could last for days. A trail of fine dust from ancient linen could betray the route a robber took. And if someone whispered to the wrong ear, the Medjay would come, their spears sharp and their orders final. In the end, the loot was only as safe as the silence of those who carried it. And silence, in the valley, was worth more than gold. In ancient Egypt, robbing a tomb was more than theft. It was an assault on the gods themselves. The punishment was designed not only to end your life, but to erase your existence from both history and the afterlife. The Medjay, Egypt's elite desert police, were the first line of response. They patrolled the Valley of the Kings by night, moving silently along the cliffs and wadis. If they caught you near a tomb with tools in your possession, there was no need for a trial to confirm your intent. The tools were the proof. When suspects were brought before the court, interrogations were swift and brutal. Records like the Abbott Papyrus and the Turin Judicial Papyrus describe questioning under beatings, sometimes with sticks or reeds, until a confession was forced. The names of accomplices were extracted the same way. It was not unusual for an entire crew to be arrested in a single day after one man broke under questioning. The punishments varied depending on the scale of the crime. Lesser thieves might face mutilation, such as the loss of an ear or nose, branding them for life as criminals. For the robbery of a royal tomb, death was almost certain. Executions were often public, both as a warning to others and as a ritual humiliation. Burning was the most feared sentence, as it destroyed the body entirely, preventing the soul from existing in the afterlife. In one recorded case from the reign of Ramses IX, a group of robbers confessed to breaking into multiple tombs, including that of Sobekemsaf II. They described stripping gold from the royal mummy, dividing it, and selling it to traders. The court's verdict was final. They were put to death, their bodies denied burial rights. Even association with a known tomb robber could bring ruin. Families of the condemned sometimes lost property and status, their names struck from community records. In a society where remembrance was a form of immortality, this erasure was a punishment as harsh as death itself. For those still living, the fear was constant. A bribe might buy a little time, but loyalties shifted quickly. A neighbor could denounce you for grain during famine. A buyer could betray you to the Medjay for favor with the temple. The risk was not only from the authorities, but from everyone you thought you could trust. And yet, despite the certainty of these punishments, tombs continued to be breached. Gold was a stronger pull than fear, and for some, the promise of one night's fortune was worth the price of an eternity in darkness. The kings of Egypt knew that no wall could keep out greed forever. As the robberies mounted, the state's response became a mix of engineering, secrecy, and sheer misdirection. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings evolved into elaborate mazes. Passages were cut in steep descents, designed to exhaust anyone carrying heavy loot. Side corridors ended abruptly or looped back on themselves, frustrating intruders who didn't know the layout. Some pharaohs relied on false doors, carved directly into solid rock, their surfaces decorated as if they led to treasure. Others used massive blocking stones, slid into place once the burial was complete. To remove one of these without proper levers and manpower could take days, and days meant discovery. In certain cases, the mummies themselves were relocated. Priests of the 21st dynasty gathered royal remains from plundered tombs and hid them together in secret caches, like the famous Deir el-Bahari find in 1881, where more than 50 kings, queens, and nobles were discovered stacked in a single chamber. This was not a precaution taken at burial, but a desperate rescue centuries later, once it became clear the valley could not be defended forever. Still, the complexity of the tombs could be staggering. A looter breaking into the tomb of Ramses VI would face corridors bending at odd angles, chambers hidden behind undecorated walls, and ceilings painted to mislead the eye. It was the kind of twisting, relentless design that reminds modern viewers of The Mummy Returns, where one chamber always seemed to lead to another, each one more disorienting than the last. Even with these measures, the state could not stop the thefts entirely. Guards were bribed, workers sold their knowledge, and desperation pushed men to risk the curses and the Medjay. Each reign brought new ideas for security, deeper shafts, heavier doors, more elaborate false rooms, but each generation of robbers learned to adapt. Sometimes, the most effective deterrent was silence. A tomb with no visible entrance, no markers, no decorated approach, could remain hidden for centuries. But secrecy only lasted as long as the memory of the builders. And in a land where families of workmen passed their trades and their secrets from father to son, that memory was never entirely lost. The arms race between tomb builders and tomb robbers lasted as long as Egypt's kings. In the end, time favored the thieves. Stone could be broken, gold could be melted, and the desert, indifferent to both, swallowed the evidence until only fragments remained. The annals of ancient Egypt are littered with accounts of tomb robberies, so bold they still read like crime thrillers thousands of years later. These were not minor thefts of trinkets or pottery. They were full-scale breaches of the resting places of kings. One of the most infamous cases is detailed in the Abbot Papyrus from the reign of Ramses IX. It records the investigation into the tomb of King Sobekemsaf II, a ruler of the 17th dynasty. The robbers tunneled through limestone, stripped the body of its gold mask, rings, and amulets, then hacked apart the wrappings to remove embedded jewels. They didn't stop at the king. His queen's body was also desecrated, her valuables taken before the robbers resealed the wall in a crude attempt to hide their work. Another famous breach was that of KV 55, a mysterious tomb in the Valley of the Kings. While its exact occupant is debated, likely Akhenaten or another Amarna period, royal archaeological evidence suggests the chamber was entered not long after burial. Grave goods were scattered, and valuable metal objects were removed, leaving behind only fragments that hinted at what had been lost. Even grand tombs like that of Ramses VI were not immune. Despite its steep corridors and heavy blocking stones, the burial was entered and stripped, its treasures making their way into the black market trade. The very workers who built such tombs often became the ones who broke into them, armed with intimate knowledge of every passage, false wall, and weak seam in the stone. Some robberies took years to discover. When caches like the one at Deir el-Bahari were uncovered by modern archaeologists, it was clear that priests had moved royal mummies there not as part of an original burial plan, but as an emergency measure after their original tombs had been compromised. By the time they were reburied, most of the original grave goods were already gone. The motivations behind these heists were not always pure greed. Famine years pushed many to risk everything for a single gold amulet that could feed a family for months. Others acted out of opportunity knowledge passed from father to son in workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina, where the builders of tombs lived just a few miles from their creations. Whatever the reason, the results were the same. Gold masks melted into ingots, carved treasures reduced to splinters, sacred wrappings torn apart for what they concealed. The silence of the tomb replaced with the clink of metal, the shuffle of feet, and the desert wind carrying away any trace of the crime. Your torch is burning low, its light shrinking with every breath of the flame. The air is thick now, hotter than the desert above, the kind of heat that sticks to your lungs and makes each inhale a labor. The gap in the wall yawns before you, just wide enough for a man to slip through. You duck inside. The chamber swallows you in darkness. Your torchlight skims across gilded surfaces, catching the gleam of gold and the shimmer of painted wood, chests inlaid with ivory. A chair fit for a god, wrappings studded with amulets. Each piece is worth more than your lifetime's labor, but it is the silence that strikes you. A silence so deep it feels like a second presence in the room. Your partner moves quickly, lifting lids, testing the weight of treasures, wrapping each in linen to muffle the sound. You force yourself to match his speed, but your eyes keep drifting to the painted faces on the coffins. The gods watch from their panels, their gaze both flat and accusing. A bead of sweat runs down your cheek and drops onto the stone floor. You pause. The drip echoes. You glance toward the entrance. Nothing. Only the muted hiss of the torch. But in your gut, a knot is tightening. You work faster, hands moving, eyes darting. The copper tang of ancient air mixes with the faint sweetness of perfumes sealed for centuries. Your head swims for a moment, and you steady yourself against a chest carved with falcons. The sound comes then, not the soft clink of gold, not the creak of wood, but something heavier, a scuff, a step. You freeze. Your partner freezes. The torchlight quivers as your grip tightens. Another step. Closer, slow, deliberate. You exchange a look with your partner. There's no way out except the tunnel you came through. And whoever is coming, they are between you and freedom. The treasures at your feet might as well be stone. In this moment, survival is the only prize worth taking. You blow out the torch. The chamber plunges into blackness, and in that perfect dark, the footsteps keep coming. Step back from the dust and the darkness. Strip away the torchlight, the chisel, the press of stone overhead. What remains is a trade that balanced on the thin edge between fortune and death. Tomb robbing in ancient Egypt was not a thrilling adventure scored with triumphant music. It was silent, suffocating, and soaked in the knowledge that one mistake could erase you from both the world of the living and the world beyond. The men who did this work were not nameless shadows. They were builders, guards, embalmers, people who once honored the dead they later stole from. They moved with the discipline of craftsmen and the precision of spies, carving through limestone in the dark while the desert slept above them. Some succeeded and vanished into obscurity, their fortunes hidden in clay jars or melted into plain ingots. Others were dragged into courts, beaten for confessions, and executed in ways designed to wipe them from memory. We imagine it differently because of the stories we tell ourselves. In The Mummy, danger comes wrapped in spectacle walls, collapsing in perfect sync, curses springing to life in a rush of wind and sand. It is a fantasy where the hero runs, the villain falls, and the treasure waits at the end. But in reality, the treasure was often gone before anyone ever looked for it, and the ones who took it rarely found glory, only the constant need to hide both their prize and themselves. The Valley of the Kings still holds secrets. Some tombs remain sealed, their locations lost to time. Perhaps they are safe because no one living remembers them. Or perhaps the men who knew their locations are buried in unmarked graves, taking their knowledge with them. If you had lived then, would you have been one of them? Would you have risked your life for gold sealed away for the afterlife of another? Or would you have walked past the cliffs, letting the dead keep what was theirs? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to see more of the history that hides in shadows, remember to like, subscribe, and keep your place in the torchlight.